Aliens accused humans of breaking rules. Until a human smiled and said, "That's why we built the fleet." The Arbiter Prime had been talking for 11 minutes when I stopped counting the charges and started counting something else. The Vethkai ambassador had used the word unilateral 9 times. I was waiting to see if he would hit an even 10. The chair they gave me had one short leg, not all 4 legs, just the one back left, enough to give the whole structure a tilt that would have been subtle to anyone who was not sitting in it. I had fixed it with my boot heel. Inside the first 30 seconds, the fix was temporary. The fix required constant pressure. I kept the pressure on while the Arbiter Prime read from his list. 612 capital-class warships constructed without Concord authorization in violation of Article 7 of the Armistice of Keller 9, Article 14 of the Frin Space Development Accord, and Articles 2, 5, 9, 11, 15, 22, and 26 of the Joint Species Arms Limitation Framework. He kept going. The Council Chamber of the Galactic Concord held 47 delegations. Each delegation had a carved stone bench, wide enough for their species' particular arrangement of limbs. The Al-Hari, oldest members of the Concord, occupied a curved platform near the ceiling. I had been told the Al-Hari translated name for the chamber meant the place where the galaxy thinks. Right now, the galaxy was thinking very loudly about what humans had done. I looked at the one chair, my chair, plain, fabricated, clearly assembled from whatever design template someone had pulled up under the category human seating. It had no armrests. The Al-Hari platform had armrests. The Vethk benches had armrests. My chair had 4 legs, one of which was short and no armrests, and it sat at the far end of a table built for 47 delegations in a chamber designed to make whoever sat in my chair feel like an afterthought. Whoever arranged this seating wanted me to feel small. That was interesting. The Arbiter Prime finished the charges. The room waited. "Commander Yara Asa," he said, "representative of the human nations, in this emergency session, you have been presented with 42 specific violations of Standing Concord Treaty. How does the human coalition respond?" I looked up from my chair. "Are you finished yet?" The silence that followed had texture. It moved through the room in a wave. Species by species, 47 delegations, processing the same 4 words and arriving at different conclusions about what they meant. The Vethkai ambassador, mid-breath for what I suspected was going to be his 10th use of unilateral, simply stopped. The Arbiter Prime blinked 3 of his 4 eyes. "Commander, the weight of these charges." I heard the charges, I said. I counted them, 42 violations, 7 treaties, 612 ships. I have excellent hearing. I was asking if the list was complete, not whether the charges were serious. He looked at me the way people look at someone doing something they do not yet understand. Not anger, not outrage, the look that comes before both. "The charges are complete," he said carefully. "Good." I reached into the bag I had placed under my chair and set a gray file folder on the table in front of me. I did not open it. "Let me tell you something about the Armistice of Keller 9. The Vethkai ambassador found his voice. "The commander has already admitted the violation." "I have not admitted anything yet," I said. "You listed charges." I confirmed. "I heard them. Those are 2 different things." I looked at the file folder. The armistice of Keller 9 was signed 460 years ago. I have read it 3 times. The language in Article 7 is very specific about the construction of unauthorized warships in Concord. Adjacent space, you want to know what the drafters defined as Concord. Adjacent space. I looked up at the chamber, 47 delegations. 9 of them had species, representatives who had actually been alive when the armistice was signed. Everything inward from the outer veil. The armistice covers everything inward. From the outer veil, our yards are. Beyond the outer veil, I let that sit for 2 seconds, by the treaty's own geographic definitions. The armistice of Keller 9 does not technically apply to the construction location. The arbiter prime straightened. The spirit of the treaty is an interesting conversation, I said. And we will have it, but it is different from the letter of the treaty. And I want everyone in this room to know. I understand the difference before we proceed. What I did not say, I had found the veil loophole in year 3 of construction. My legal team had spent 2 years checking it from every angle. It was real, it was thin, it was not a true defense, but it was enough to buy time in a room like this, and time was what I needed. The room had shifted, not in my favor. Not yet, but the simple, furious certainty with which 47 species had entered this chamber had acquired a small crack. The Alhiri elder high on its curved platform had not moved. 9 eyes, it had been watching me since I sat down. Every time I looked up, it was watching. Not with hostility, with something that felt uncomfortably like recognition. I pushed the file folder to the center of the table. Actually, I said, let me start somewhere else. I picked the folder back up. The arbiter prime's jaw tightened. Commander, I will get to this, I said, I promise. You. But context matters, so let me start at the beginning. I put the folder back in my bag. 17 years ago, a deep-range probe at the edge of the outer veil registered an anomaly. I want to tell you what that anomaly was, and what happened when we reported it, and how we arrived in this chamber today, with 612 ships and 42 treaty violations. I pulled a thermos from the same bag and poured coffee. The Vethkai ambassador made a sound. I will be quick, I said. I was not quick. The first report went out 17 years ago. Probe designation HR-7, Outer Veil. Approach Sector Grid 9. The data package was 700 pages of sensor readings, mass shadow analysis, and spectrographic imaging. My predecessor, a deep-range survey chief named Owen Drake, had attached a personal note to the report. I had read that note so many times I could recite it from memory. It said, "This warrants investigation." 3 words after 700 pages. Owen was economical that way. The Concord's Deep Space Monitoring Committee reviewed the report. 14 months later, while the anomaly sat in the outer veil doing whatever it was doing, they issued a response. I did not need to look it up. Insufficient evidence to warrant further investigation at this time. Recommend continued monitoring. I set down my coffee. Continued monitoring, I said to the chamber. We were already monitoring. That was how we found it. They told us to keep doing the thing we were already doing. The orbital prime said, "Deep space monitoring receives thousands of reports." 700 pages, I said. 700 pages with a 3-word personal note from a man who had been running deep-range survey operations for 20 years and had never, in 20 years, attached a personal note to anything. Owen Drake had retired 2 years after that report, not because of the response. He never said it was because of the response, but I had worked alongside him for a decade, and I knew the look of a man who had done the right thing and found out it did not matter. Year 3, a second probe, different sector, same region, outer veil. Approach, mass shadow readings, larger. This time, the object or objects had moved toward us, not fast, not what you would call aggressive, more like the way a tide moves, slow, continuous. Not a thing you could point to and say, there it moved, it just arrived. Closer than it had been. I sent the report myself that year. I was not yet in command of anything significant. I was a deep-range navigation specialist, and I filed the report through the proper channels, and I waited 14 months again. Insufficient evidence. Year 5, I started keeping a personal file, copies of every anomaly report, every response, every date stamp, not because I thought I would need them someday. I needed to put the weight of it somewhere outside my own head. Year 6, a Vethka merchant vessel called the Sorvana went dark near the outer edge of Sector 12. It was registered, insured, crewed by a family operation. 3 generations, the record said. Grandmother to grandchildren. One of those ships that had been running the same route for so long that the crew stopped thinking of it as work and started thinking of it as home. The Concord investigation took 2 months. The finding was engine failure. I looked at the Vethko ambassador. He was very still. We recovered wreckage from the Sorvana 8 months after the Concord closed. The investigation, I said, my team was completing a survey pass in the same sector. The wreckage was distributed across a debris field approximately 200 km wide. I paused. The engine was intact. It was cold, meaning it had been powered down, not failed, powered down deliberately, possibly to reduce its signal. The rest of the ship was not intact. The ambassador said nothing. I filed an amended report with the Concord's Deep Space Monitoring Committee. I said I included our wreckage analysis, our mass shadow data, and a timeline mapping the proximity of the anomaly readings to the Sorvana's last known position. I poured more coffee. They acknowledged receipt. No further response. I wanted to be honest about what I felt during that period, not what I showed. What I felt. There was a specific afternoon, a long time ago now, when I was sitting in a monitoring station with a cup of cold coffee and an acknowledgement receipt on my screen, and I understood, not as a fear, not as a theory, but as a flat, quiet fact that we were on our own, that the framework we had trusted to act on the things that needed acting on had a hole in it so wide that the thing moving through the outer veil could walk right in, and the Concord's committees would still be reviewing the paperwork. That afternoon, I started making different plans. I did not tell the chamber this. I told the chamber the data. Year 8, 3 more vessels went dark, different species, different sectors, all outer veil adjacent. Concord opened a joint investigation that ran for 16 months and concluded with a recommendation for increased monitoring frequency. Year 10, I was given my first command. I used the first 6 months to build a team. Navigators, engineers, sensor Specialists, 3 of the best deep range analysts in the human systems. We spent the following 4 years building a complete picture of what was in the outer veil. Not a report picture, a real one. Mass, velocity, distribution, behavioral, pattern analysis, a full structural mapping of the anomaly based on 7 years of accumulated probe data, 640 pages. Not 700. I had cut it down. I was trying to be respectful of the committee's time. Year 14, the report went to the Concord. I accompanied it with a formal request for a coalition response mission, a joint investigation with military escort, and a temporary authorization to begin defensive construction in the Outer Veil region. 11 months later, insufficient evidence to warrant military response at this time. I read that response on a Tuesday. On Wednesday, I called a meeting with every senior engineer and fleet architect I could reach. I did not ask them whether what I was planning was legal. I already knew what it was. On Thursday, I began the design process for the first of what would eventually become 612 ships. The chamber was very quiet. I had not raised my voice once. Data delivered at a normal volume in a quiet room has a particular weight. You cannot argue with the silence that follows it. So yes, I said, we broke the rules. I looked at the file folder still in my bag. Your rules were written for a galaxy where nothing was coming. The Vethkai ambassador had stopped blinking, which I understood was his species signal for something they could not name yet. The Arbiter Prime said, very carefully, what exactly did your probes detect in the Outer Veil? I looked at him. Something moved through me that was not triumph and was not satisfaction. Something older than both. The feeling of having held a door shut, alone for a very long time, and finally having someone on the other side put their hand on it. I smiled. Not a comfortable smile. Good, I said, that is the right question. I reached into my bag and put the file folder on the table. Let me tell you what we named it. The file was not thin. 412 pages organized by year, by sector, by type of observation, mass shadow, readings, thermal signatures, behavioral analysis, because you could, after enough data, describe what the thing in the Outer Veil did as behavior. It made choices. Not human choices, not even what most species in this room would recognize as choices, but there were patterns, preferences, a consistent and reproducible response to stimuli that added up over years to something you could model, something you could eventually predict. I slid the folder to the center of the table. You can review the full file. That is why I printed it. The Arbiter Prime reached for it. He opened to the first page. His second set of eyes moved to find a tail pair tracking the first line of text. He looked up. The Vorath, he said. That is what we called them, I said. Naming rights go to whoever finds it. First, we found it. Across the room, something happened that I had not anticipated. The Alhari elder, nine-eyed ancient, the one who had not spoken once in over 2 hours of session, made a sound, not a word, a sound, low and resonant, the kind that bypasses the translator entirely and speaks directly to some older part of the brain that simply knows it means something important. Every species in the room turned to look at the Alhari elder. The elder spoke 6 words in its own language, a language so old that the Translator struggled, then delivered the closest equivalent it could produce. The devouring, we thought it myth. The room temperature had not changed. It felt like it had. That word, I said to the elder. Devouring, is that a direct translation? The elder was quiet for a moment, then it said in its careful translated voice, it is the closest word. The original means a process, something that is not alive in the way we mean alive but does what living things do, consumes, moves, consumes again. That matches our behavioral analysis. I said. I looked around the chamber, 47 delegations, 9 of them had been alive. When the armistice of Keller 9 was signed, the Alhari had been spacefaring for 90,000 years, 90,000 years, and this thing moving through the outer veil existed in their oldest stories not as history but as myth. The kind of myth you build around something you survived but cannot fully believe you survived. The Voreth, I said, do not communicate. We tried 14 separate contact attempts. Over 6 years, every first contact protocol in the Concord's database plus 3 our own teams designed from scratch, no response, no signal, acknowledgement, no behavioral change in response to our transmissions. I paused. We tried broadcasting on a frequency range we detected them emitting. Themselves, they did not respond to their own signal type. What do they want? A delegation representative asked from somewhere in the middle of the room. They do not want, I said, that is the point, they do not want anything we have. A word for, they process star systems. They move through space, and when they encounter a solar body with accessible material, planets, moons, astral fields, they strip it and move on. They are not malicious, they are not hungry. In the way that implies choice, they are not aware of us in any way we can detect or communicate with. They do what they do the way a river does what it does. The river does not hate the valley. The river just moves through it. You are describing the destruction of inhabited worlds, the Vethkai ambassador said. Yes. And your response is to compare it to a river. My response is to tell you accurately what we are dealing with so that what comes next makes sense to you. I looked at him directly. The Vethkai colony on Sorrow Prime, your oldest settlement. 400 million people. He did not move. Based on our most recent deep rain trajectory data, updated 3 weeks before this tribunal was convened, the leading edge of the Vorcha Formation will reach the outer veil's exit boundary in approximately 16 months. I let that number sit in the air. The first inhabited system past that boundary is Sorrow Prime. The chamber moved, not dramatically, not a single outburst. The motion was smaller than that, the kind of collective physical shift that happens when every person in a room has the same thought at the same moment and there is no sound large enough to cover it. The Vethka ambassador stood, sat back, down, stood again. You knew this, he said. You knew the trajectory, and you did not. I sent reports, I said, 14 formal requests for a coalition defensive response over 11 years. I have the acknowledgement receipts, every single one. I looked at him steadily. Last request was denied 23 months ago. 3 weeks after that denial, I authorized full construction acceleration on the final 200 ships. The Arbiter Prime was still looking at the first page of the file. He turned to the second page. He read something. He set the file down. Why, he said slowly, did you not bring this information directly to the full council, bypass the monitoring committee? This level of threat warrants emergency session. Emergency session requires a sponsoring member nation. I said, humans are not a member nation. We are an associated species under a provisional development treaty. We cannot call emergency session. We cannot bypass the monitoring committee. We cannot authorize joint operations or request military coalition support. Those pathways are not available to us. I picked up my coffee. So we used the pathway that was available. Nobody spoke. The Armistice of Keller 9 says we cannot build unauthorized warships in conquered adjacent space. I said, we built them in non-adjacent space. 17 years of treaty language analysis, probe data, construction logistics, rationing, budget redirection, every human colony expansion program delayed by 3 decades, every surplus resource across every human-governed system redirected to the outer Veil yards. I paused. 612 ships fully armed, fully crewed, currently positioned at the Veil boundary, pointed outward, the Arbiter Prime repeated. Not at conquered space, I said, not at anyone's home systems, at the Veil, at what is coming through it. The file was still open on the table. I nodded toward it. Last section, page 410. That is the fleet composition breakdown. I stood. I built it to hold the line at the Veil while conquered forces mobilized for secondary engagement support. The timeline is tight. 16 months sounds like time. It is not a lot of time. I looked at the room. Your rules were written for a galaxy where nothing was coming. I said, I understand the rules. I understand why they exist. I'm not standing here telling you the rules were wrong. I am standing here telling you that we noticed something your rules had not accounted for, and we spent 17 years asking you to help us account for it. And when the asking stopped working, I smiled that smile, the old one, the one I had earned. That is why we built the fleet. The Ilhari elder closed all 9 eyes. When it opened them again, it said, show us the fleet. I put my hand on the file folder. The room was ready to open it now. The outer Veil looked like nothing from the outside. That was always the first thing. You crossed the last charted boundary. You pointed your ship into the deep between systems, and there was nothing dramatic about it. No color change, no visible line, just the familiar darkness of space. And then, if you had the right sensors, which most ships did not, the readings that told you the darkness here was different, denser in some way that was not a physical measurement but was absolutely a correct description. The outer Veil was the darkness that had something in it. I had made this crossing 14 times. It got easier. No, it did not. The Annihilators jumped out of transit into full battle orientation at 3:40 ship time, and before the transit disorientation had fully cleared, the crew had already called out the fleet status. All 612 ships present and locked, spread across a defensive line that from the observation deck reduced stars to background detail. They stretched in every direction I could see. I had been there for every hull plate. I had approved every engine specification, every weapon system, every communications protocol. I had visited every construction yard. I had spoken to The workers, engineers, welders, programmers, people who gave up their own futures to build something they hoped they would never have to use. I knew what the fleet had cost, seeing it assembled for the first time, as a complete single force produced something in me that I will not describe because it was mine. Admiral, said Owen from the command station, Owen Drake's son as it happened, same first name by his own choice when he joined the service. He had his father's economy with words. Fleet is green across all sectors. Positioning holds, sensor net is live. The Concord liaison is aboard. Arrived 20 minutes ago, observation deck 2. The Concord had assigned a liaison to the Annan 6 days after the tribunal session concluded, not a political officer, a military one. Cale, a young Vethguy officer, first generation born on Sorrel Prime. He was 23 years old and had accepted the assignment in approximately 40 seconds. When it was offered, which I respected, he was standing at the observation window on deck 2 when I arrived. He was not looking at the fleet, he was looking at the space beyond the fleet. The deeper dark, the direction the Voreth were coming from. He said without turning, I grew up looking at stars and thinking they were permanent. They are permanent, I said, relative to a human lifespan. They are essentially permanent. The Voreth do not think in human lifespans. No, they do not think at all. Technically, they process. I stood beside him at the window, the colony records for Sorrel Prime. I reviewed them before we deployed. He was quiet. 420 million people, I said. Agricultural base, 3 universities. A coastal city that your species travel. Records describe as the best place in charted space to watch a sunrise, which I found surprising because your species has 842 member worlds, and apparently this particular sunrise on this particular coast is the one worth traveling for. He looked at me. You read our travel records? I read everything, I said. That is the job. He turned back to the window. How many of those 420 million people know you are here? All of them. The Concord public announcement went out 5 days ago. Emergency defense action. Disclosure, I had pushed hard for that. No more closed committees, no more 14-month response cycles. Full disclosure or we hold the fleet back in. I had been willing to mean it. They know. How do they feel about the fact that the people who have been preparing for this for 17 years are human? I thought about the messages I had received in the 72 hours after the announcement, not the official ones, the personal ones from individuals, from colony residents, from parents who had looked up Sorrel Prime's odds and then looked at their children. There were many of them, they said, different things in different languages, but they all had the same weight underneath. Some of them, I said, send us coordinates for that sunrise. Cale did not speak. His species did not cry. Their equivalent was a full body stillness, a slowing of all peripheral motion, like a person standing very still in a strong wind. He stood very still. What built the fleet? He asked after a moment. Not what it was made of. Why? I thought about Owen Drake Isar filing his 3-word note after 20 years of clean work and watching nothing come of it. I thought about the Sorvana family, 3 generations running the same route, and the ship powered down deliberately, and the response time was 2 months in. The finding was engine failure. I thought about the afternoon with the cold coffee and the acknowledgement. Receipt, that flat quiet fact, that shift in plans. Humans, I said, are not good at accepting that something bad is happening and no one is going to stop it. We have a word for it. The word is unacceptable. We use it too much, honestly, but sometimes the thing actually is unacceptable, and then the word does real work. I paused. 420 million people being destroyed by something that does not know their names because a committee found insufficient evidence to investigate for 17 straight years. That was unacceptable. He nodded slowly. So you built the answer. We built an answer, I said. There is more than one. The fleet is the first. At 6:12, the sensor net lit up. Not a ping, not a single reading. The whole net simultaneously, every probe and relay and deep range array we had positioned across the veil boundary, all responding at once to the same thing, entering their range. I was at the command bridge in 4 minutes. The screen showing the Vorcha formation required a moment of recalibration, not the kind that comes from a technical problem, the kind that comes from a brain finishing the process of updating its estimate of the world. They did not look like ships. They did not look like anything with a structure that matched any design logic we could parse. They were masses, dense, dark, slow in terms of velocity, but vast in terms of presence. The sensor readings translated their physical profiles into the false color imaging for human viewing, and what came out on screen was a collection of shapes that were approximately the way nightmare is approximately a story. The outline was recognizable. What was inside it was not. Formation count, Owen said. The sensor analyst, a young woman named Petra, who had been awake for 29 straight hours and showed no sign of stopping, said 41 confirmed mass signatures. Possible additional contacts in the deeper range. Sensor shadow makes confirmation difficult. Estimate between 55 and 70 total. I had run the projections for 41. 41 was hard. 70 was a different conversation. Fleet disposition, I said. All ships online, weapons charged. Shields nominal. Owen was calm. The way, a very good bridge crew is calm, not because there was nothing to be afraid of, but because being afraid was not on the list of things to do right now. Your call, Admiral. I looked at the screen, at the shapes that were not ships, at the false color imaging trying to give form to something that had no form in any architecture any species in the Concord had ever built. Behind our line, 6 hours out, the first wave of Concord emergency response ships was forming. They would not reach our position for 6 hours. In 6 hours, the Vor-Eth formation would cover half the distance to our line. The math was what the math was. This is Admiral Ozai to full fleet, I said into the open channel. You have trained for this. You know your assignments. You know the plan. I looked at the screen. Whatever happens at this line, the colony on Soro Prime is 6 light hours behind us. Nothing passes this line. I paused. That is all. That is the whole job. Nothing passes this line. Kale was standing at the edge of the bridge. He had not been assigned there. No one told him to leave. Are you scared? He asked. No, I said. I was absolutely scared. Engines live, weapons free, all sectors, I said. Hold the line. The fleet moved. 41 hours. That was the engagement. 41 hours from first contact to the moment the Voreth formation began, not retreating, which was the wrong word for what it did, but recalculating. The distinction mattered. A retreat is a decision made by something that knows it has been beaten. What the Voreth did was slower than that, and in some ways more unsettling. They did not stop. They did not turn. They continued moving forward, unchanged in velocity, unchanged purpose, until some internal calculation shifted, some measure of resistance encountered versus resource expenditure required to continue, and then they altered course slightly, then more. The leading edge of the formation was no longer pointing at our line. It was pointing at open space, deep, uninhabited space far past the Concord's fringe. They were not beaten. They had found a lower resistance route, but they were gone. 41 hours, 47 ships lost on our side. 31 human vessels, 16 from the Concord's emergency response wave, which had arrived 5 hours into the engagement and fought, to their significant credit, as hard as anyone I have ever seen fight. The Vethkai contingent in that response wave had known exactly what Colony World was 6 hours behind our line. They had fought like it. I stood the crew down in shifts. Ship was quiet in the way that ships are quiet after something that required everything, not peaceful, emptied out. The kind of quiet that comes when a building finishes shaking. Owen brought me a status report and then just stood there. Say it, I said. We lost the Callaway and the North Star in the final push, he said. Hartwell took critical damage, but she is going to make it back. 47 total. Confirmed. I looked at the crew roster on the secondary screen. Names, 412 names. Across 47 ships, not anonymous. I had approved every crew manifest. I know, I said. The Concord Response Commander wants to speak with you. Give me 10 minutes. Owen left. I had my 10 minutes and I used them looking at the roster and at the screen that showed the Vorcha formation's new trajectory. Heading deep, heading away, heading toward empty space that contained nothing any species had yet claimed. The math on their new route put their next encounter with inhabited space approximately 400 years away, assuming continued current velocity. 400 years. That was not a solved problem. That was a postponed one. I made a note in the fleet log to begin planning for the next phase, because 400 years moved faster than 17 when you were not paying attention. Then I went to speak with the Concord Response Commander. His name was Drax Solon, a Vethkai senior officer who had been at the line with his own contingent for the back half of the engagement. He had fought hard and lost ships and had the expression of someone who had just recalculated a very large number of previous assumptions all at once. 41 hours, he said. 41 hours, I agreed. Against a formation that size, he looked at the tactical replay on his screen, the positioning at the veil boundary, the anchor points, the relay net. This formation was designed years ago. 7, I said. The core formation plan is 7 years old. We refined it 4 times. You planned for a formation that large. We planned for a formation we did not have complete data on, I said, so we built for the high end of our estimate and then added more. That is the job. He was quiet for a moment. My daughter is on Sorrow Prime, he said. I said nothing. She sent me a message when the public announcement went out. He continued. She asked me if the humans were really going to hold the line. What did you tell her? I told her I did not know. He looked at the tactical replay. I should have told her yes. I did not tell him about the cold coffee and the acknowledgement receipt. I did not tell him about Owen Drake Sr.'s 3-word note, some things you earn. The right to know slowly, not all at once. She will get that sunrise, I said. Tell her to send me the coordinates. He looked at me. Something moved across his face that functioned like a smile. 3 weeks after the engagement, the Galactic Concord convened its first formal restructuring session in 300 years. I was given a chair with 4 functioning legs this time. I did not mention the first chair. Some points make themselves. The session ran for 11 days. I attended 7 of them. The other 4 were handled by the human diplomatic team. Felix Hale, our lead treaty negotiator, had the specific gift of making aggressive positions sound reasonable, which was a talent I had always been willing to borrow. He was good at it. The final framework was largely his. The armistice of Keller 9 was formally dissolved on the 8th day. The Concord's Deep Space Monitoring Committee was restructured into a joint early warning directorate with mandatory cross-species staffing and a maximum response timeline of 30 days, not 14 months. 30 days. Humanity was granted full member nation status, voting rights, and a permanent seat on the Security Council. I had expected this. I had prepared for it. I had a speech written out by hand on actual paper that I had reviewed 3 times and then thrown away because when the vote passed in the chamber acknowledged the shift, everything I had written felt like too much, too arranged, too formal for what the room actually needed. What I said instead was, thank you. We will pull our weight. That was recorded in the Concord session transcripts as the full statement of the human delegation upon receiving full member status. Felix was not thrilled. On the 9th day, the Alhuri elder asked to speak privately. The elder's personal chamber aboard the station was the oldest room I had ever been in, not the oldest looking, the oldest by documented record. The Alhuri had been using this station as a Concord base since the organization's founding, and the elder had been present for that founding, and the room contained a physical record of that span of time in the form of objects, markings, layered materials, the accumulated presence of 90,000 years of one continuous life. I sat in the room and felt the age of it settle on me the way humidity settles. The elder sat across from me, all 9 eyes open. The devouring, it said, in our oldest records there is a word that means a moment when a young species does something that makes the elder species understand what the young species actually is. It paused, not what they expected the young species to be, what they actually are. What word is that? I asked. There is no translation, the elder said. The concept does not exist in languages younger than 40,000 years. I thought about that for a moment. The humans, it said, spent 17 years building a defense for a galaxy that told them their evidence was insufficient. They did not ask permission. They did not wait. They built the answer, and then they held the line. The elder's 9 eyes did something I had no framework for. Interpreting. In 470 years, of member nation history. No human delegation has been invited to speak privately with the Alhari elder. I am the first. You are the first, it said. You should know what that means. I was not certain what it meant. I did not say this because the elder already knew it, and some silences are more respectful than filling them. What I did say was, the Vorithar. 400 years out, new trajectory. Uninhabited space, we have time. 400 years is not much time, the elder said. No, I said, it is not. What will the humans do with 400 years? I thought about the construction yards. Cold now, the first wave of ships deployed, the workers sent home, but the yards themselves still standing. Infrastructure, design capacity, institutional knowledge built into every beam of every facility. You did not build something like that and then leave it empty. Build more ships, I said. The elder was quiet for a long time. Yes, it said finally, we thought you would say that. The Annan Accord was signed on the final day of the restructuring session. I was not consulted at the name. The Alhari elder had proposed it directly to the Arbiter Prime in a closed session, and by the time I heard about it, the name was already in the official draft. The Arbiter Prime called me to inform me personally, which was a courtesy I appreciated even as I spent 30 seconds staring at the ceiling of my temporary quarters, doing a very poor job of being composed about it. My ship, named for an old story about a spider who tricked the sky god into giving the world its stories. My sister had named her years ago when she was choosing the call sign for the vessel I was building. She had said with the particular certainty of someone who had thought about a thing for a long time and arrived at a clean answer, it has to be something that punches above its weight. Adez had been 26 when her survey vessel went dark in Sector 12. The Concord's report said engine failure. I had not corrected the report in this session, not because I could not, because what I needed from this session was not acknowledgement of what happened to my sister. What snorts I needed was the thing that would prevent it from happening to 420 million strangers. I had gotten that. That was enough. Kale found me after the signing. He had been transferred to a full liaison post, the first of what would become a joint species fast response coordination team, a program that had not existed before this session and would, within 5 years, have permanent staff from 30 of the Concord's 47 member species. He found me on the observation deck of the station. It was late by the station's rotation cycle. The celebration, and there was celebration, appropriate and earned, was happening. One level below, and the sound of it reached up through the floor as a low, warm hum. He offered in the Vethkai tradition, the touching of foreheads, a gesture given only to family. I leaned forward and let him. We stood there for a moment, both of us, looking out at the same dark. Your ship, he said, the Annans, what does it mean? It is a spider, I said, from a very old story. What does the spider do in the story? It outsmarts everyone larger than it, I said, and wins things it has no business winning. He thought about that. Good name for a flagship, he said. My sister named it, I said. He looked at me. She had good judgment, I said. He did not push. Kale had learned in the weeks since the tribunal how to read the shape of a thing I was not going to Elaborate on. He left it where I put it. The celebration downstairs, he said. They are asking for you. I know. You are not going. I will, I said, 5 minutes. He nodded and left me with my thermos and the observation window and the dark. I poured the last of the coffee. It was cold. I drank it anyway. Somewhere in the deep space past the veil, the Voreth moved through the dark. On their new trajectory, slower than a threat, faster than safe, 400 years was. The estimates had been wrong. Before, I pulled up the construction yard status. On my personal screen, the yards were idle for now. The first draft proposals for the second fleet phase were sitting in my inbox, filed 3 days ago by a junior engineer named Grace Holden, who had been one of the best designers in the Vale construction program and had apparently decided without being asked that the end of the first phase was a sensible time to begin the planning documents for the second. Grace had her father's instincts. Her father had worked in the yard for 11 years. She had grown up visiting him on shift. I opened the draft, read the first page. She had projected a build window of 8 years for the initial second phase. Vessels contingent on the Concord. Opening the joint construction. Authorization included in the Annans Accord framework. That authorization was not yet active. It would require another 18 months of implementation before construction could formally begin. 8 years plus 18 months, call it 10 years. For the first second phase ship. 400 years of runway minus 10. That was still a lot of ships. I started writing notes in the margin of Grace's document, not approval. Questions, challenges, the kind of friction that made a design document better before it became a plan, better before it became a ship. I had learned this from Owen Drake SR, check your work 3 times, then check it again. Galaxy does not reward the assumption that the first answer is the right one. I finished my notes, sent them back to Grace with a 3-word reply. Good, keep going. I capped the thermos, put it in my bag. I went downstairs to where the Galaxy was celebrating the first good thing that had happened because humanity had refused for 17 years to accept the answer no. There were a lot of species down there who were alive because of those 17 years. I shook a lot of hands. I accepted. Translated thanks in 47 languages. I drank something the Olhari contingent offered me that tasted like the first day of winter and left a warmth behind it that lasted hours. At some point, someone asked me what was next. I thought about Grace's document, the construction yard estimates, the 400 years that were not as long as they sounded. I thought about a survey report, 700 pages, 3-word note filed by a good man, and the certainty it would matter, in the full knowledge that it might not. Sent anyway because that was the job. And the job was the job whether anyone was watching or not. I thought about my sister who named a ship after a spider, who believed in punching above your weight, who was gone in Sector 12 on a route she ran for the last time in the Concord, found insufficient evidence, and I found something else instead. 612 reasons to keep going. What is next? I repeated. I smiled. That has always been the job, I said. And I went back to work.